A major shakeup in the race to be Kansas City's next mayor, plus a new push to restrict judges in Kansas and for body cameras in Kansas City. The National Right to Life Convention comes to Overland Park, and protesters rally for immigrant children on the plaza. Why there's booing in KCK, and how much is a Bernie endorsement worth in the race to unseat a Kansas congressman?
Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Bob and Marlise Gorley, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello again, I'm Nick Haynes, and welcome to the program that connects the dots on the news of the week in this place we call home, rolling up their sleeves to analyze the week's top local stories. From the Call newspaper, senior writer Eric Wesson; from KMBC 9 News, chief political reporter Michael Mahoney; and from 41 Action News, Kat Reed; and from the pages of your Kansas City Star, Dave Helling. Now, for many of us, the biggest local story of the week was the brutally hot weather. If you live out in the Lee Summit area, it was damage from a tornado that touched down at Lake Lotawana, causing extensive storm damage. A storm of a different kind wreaking havoc in the Kansas City mayor's race. Last week it was rumor. This week it is fact. Former U.S. Senate candidate and Missouri Secretary of State Jason Kander making it official. He's running for mayor.
I want to make sure that everybody in Kansas City feels that they don't have to move across town or move out of town in order for their family to have a chance of success.
Also this week, City Councilman Quinton Lucas joining the growing list of people who now see themselves in Sly James's job. Meanwhile, City Councilwoman Jolie Justice, who some viewed as the front runner in the race, quits and endorses Kander.
While initially I had some disappointment that this wasn't going to be my immediate path, I quickly pivoted to what's in the best interest of Kansas City, and I put Kansas City first, and I'm excited to keep doing that.
Oh, he noticed you, Kat Reed, in that video. Of course, they all video there. But is Jason Kander considered now the front runner in this race, or is that a short-term, shallow analysis of this race?
Well, we are still a long way out, but he is definitely considered one of the front runners, I would say. His entry into the race was a shock to all, including Councilwoman Jolie Justice and Councilman Quinton Lucas, who said when they called him when he called them last week, they were totally taken aback, had no idea that he was going to consider this.
And so we see Jolie Justice, the city councilwoman, who some people viewed as the front runner, leaving the race. Who else loses because of Jason Kander entering this race, Michael?
Everybody that didn't have a lot of money in this race and was hoping to be able to fundraise. There are some candidates in here that do have money. Scott Taylor has over $300,000. Quinton Lucas has more than $125,000. Some of the other candidates on the city council do not have that kind of money. A couple of the private businessmen that are in this race, like Steve Miller, also have it. What's really important here is to make sure that this is still a campaign and it's not a coronation. And I think there's a rush to judgment here that, bingo, it's Jason and we're done. The campaigns, the reporters that are going to cover this, and the voters that are going to make this decision need to continue to ask questions about some very important issues that the next mayor is going to have to deal with, like violent crime, like the sales tax, like affordable housing, and a half dozen others that probably I don't know about right now. This rush to coronation is a bad move for Kansas City, and Jason Kander is one of the candidates. He's not the mayor designate.
Let's put out, by the way, the full screen here of all of the candidates. I mean, there are 9 currently in this race. But Dave Helling, some people would view Jason Kander, though, as being a very partisan individual. He, a big Democrat poster child individual who has been going after the Republican Party, going after Donald Trump, and yet he's going to be having to go to Jefferson City to ask for, if he was elected mayor, to ask for legislation for supportive of Kansas City. How is that going to be viewed then, given his background?
Well, he might argue that it would be helpful to have a background in Jefferson City, and he was, of course, a state representative. But remember, Nick, when he left the Secretary of State's office, he delivered a speech before the General Assembly that irritated just about everyone, just blasted them on voting rights. So it'll be tough, but Sly James doesn't get a lot of audiences down in Jefferson City that result in actual legislation. So I'm not sure that's a big qualifying factor. I I do want to mention a little bit, Mike talked about some of the folks who might have been hurt by this announcement. I think Phil Glenn was one of those most set back. In fact, we were led to believe that Phil Glenn got into the race in part at the urging of Jason Kander and their friends or were friends. And that Phil Glenn is quite angry that Jason Kander has then, in essence, surprisingly got into the race. But I do think that's the same constituency. They're the same age. It's sort of that 4th District corridor vote that they were both going for. So I don't expect him to get out anytime soon. And Mike is right. We need to listen to everybody. But that's one of the guys that was hurt.
Eric.
And I agree with Mike, too. I wouldn't jump out and call Jason Kander the forerunner or one of the forerunners because, one, when he ran in the Senate race against Blunt, he didn't do overwhelmingly well in Kansas City. That's number one. Number two, I think that out of all the candidates that you have Quinton Lucas, who's run a citywide election before and did pretty well because he was elected, versus the other candidates who haven't run citywide. Jermaine Reed has done well in the 3rd District voting-wise, but can he run a citywide campaign? That's something that remains to be seen. Phil Glenn has an issue as well, and it's been rumored throughout that he might try to go for a 4th District at-large seat rather than the mayor's race because him and Jason Kander's relationship. So Quinton Lucas does have crossover appeal north of the river, some places south of the river. So I think it's going to be a pretty interesting race. And Scott Taylor has money, but Scott Taylor doesn't have that personality or charisma.
I did want to add, I think we cannot forget that the Kansas City electorate is very savvy and very keyed into wanting someone who understands the local issues and has been here, and that is one of the obstacles that Jason Kander faces. He's been traveling the country with his group, Let America Vote, to combat voter suppression. He's been very popular with his podcast nationally, but it's going to be talking about those issues, talking about the terminal, talking about streetcar extension, talking about his vision for Kansas City specifically that voters are really going to want to hear.
And that's a very different skill than being a Secretary of State in Missouri or pushing a button along with 100 other people in the Missouri House of Representatives, Michael.
Right, and that's one of the reasons that he was interested and got into this race is because there's nothing wrong with political ambition. Let me first say, he needed executive experience in a serious fashion for if he runs for governor down the line of the United States Senate or whatever. The other thing is Jason Kander in that Senate race in 2016 performed very, very well, Eric, in Kansas City. He did very well on that. And
not in the black community.
Well, I'm talking about in Kansas City. And the other thing to remember about this is Jason Kander would be a senator in the United States Senate right now had it not been for the Trump landslide in the state of Missouri. Roy Blunt rode the Donald Trump coattails to a 3-point win in 2016. Trump carried Missouri by 19. Trump won that race, or Blunt won that race by just 3.
You know, while some may be concerned that Jason Kander would be too partisan to be an effective mayor, it's not like the current office holder doesn't embroil himself in divisive national issues. Mayor James joining hundreds on the Country Club Plaza over the weekend at a rally against separating immigrant parents from their children.
These are children that are being separated from their families. It is traumatizing. It is inhuman. It is immoral. It is wrong. We must stop it now.
The mayor also telling the crowd to seize the issue as Kansas City's cause. But what role does Kansas City play in what really is a federal issue here, Kat?
Well, I think that it all comes down to pressure from constituents, and we do have Representative Cleaver, and then obviously on the Kansas side we have Yoder, who has the keys to the money in some cases when it comes to Homeland Security. So I think that those are the ways that Kansas City can put pressure or influence the outcome of this.
You know, I also noticed that the Kansas City started an editorial about asking Governor Collier and other state officials in the state of Kansas to also speak out against this and look into this. What is the role of state officials in Kansas in this issue,
Well, of
Dave?
course, like all states, Kansas and Missouri have some stake in what we decide on the border. In Kansas, some of the kids that were being separated from their families were actually being held or kept, or whatever verb you want to use, in Topeka in a private facility, and we were anxious to make sure that they were looked after well and that the state had some oversight role in terms of the way those children were being held in that facility. So that's important too. But I would say that the fact that Mayor James is talking about this national issue reflects a little bit his own national ambitions. Now, he's not going to run for president, but he does have a role in the National Democratic Party in some ways. That's why a lot of people, by the way, Nick, expect Sly James to endorse or at least support Jason Kander going forward for mayor.
The role of Kansas in housing these unaccompanied kids, about 50 of them that are over at the Villages group home in Topeka, is very, very limited. And it's limited because they don't have any contractual control over this. The Villages contract is with the Department of Health and Human Services to house about 50 kids that were unaccompanied when they crossed the border, and that they are being held there, and most of them are there and have been there before this crisis erupted this spring. So when the governor says we're going to make sure that the villages comply with all the state laws regarding group homes, this is a facility that has been around since the 1960s. It was created by Carl Menninger. They have passed repeated inspections by the state of Kansas. It's nice to say, yeah, we're going to look at them, but the amount of state control here is extremely limited because it's a federal contract.
Kansas City is playing host this week to the National Right to Life Convention, the Overland Park Convention Center, the stage for the country's largest anti-abortion organization. Over the years, the convention has attracted some of the nation's best-known political names, from John McCain, Mitt Romney, Marco Rubio, and Ted Cruz. And you'd think with abortion firmly back in the headlines with the retirement of Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy, the stakes have never been higher. So why is it that the most prominent speakers this year are locals? Kansas Governor Jeff Collier and Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach.
The reason that the National Right to Life Convention is in Overland Park this year has to do almost exclusively with Kansas abortion politics. There is a law that was passed by the legislature in 2015 that bans a certain procedure during second trimester abortions and the use of surgical instruments to remove the fetus. It has never been put in place because it's been tied up in the court. The Kansas State Supreme Court has had this case since March of 2017, more than a year ago. And one of the reasons Kansans for Life pressed the National Right to Life organization was bring this to Kansas because we want to call attention to this situation. And if we lose this court case, and they expect to lose the court case in Topeka in front of the High Court, if we lose this case, then there's going to be a concerted effort in the state of Kansas to pass a right to life amendment to the state constitution. The fact that this happened, this convention opened up one day after the Kennedy announcement of his retirement is serendipitous and energized that convention, as you can imagine. But this is about Kansas abortion politics, the fact that the National Right to Life folks are in Kansas.
You had Jeff Collier, the governor, Chris Kobach. Absent from the speaker list was Kevin Yoder, Dave Helling, the Kansas congressman, who lives in Overland Park. It's at the Overland Park Convention Center. He has a national 100% rating from the National Right to Life Convention. Why wasn't he part of that?
Well, it may be because in the 3rd District, he doesn't want to draw a lot of attention to that issue. If the 3rd District race revolves around abortion, especially now with the change in the court, it might cause him a problem with some voters, might help him with others. But it's extraordinarily important that Kansans, and for that matter Missourians, pay attention to abortion-related politics now more than ever before, precisely because of Anthony Kennedy's retirement, because it's likely if the court ever deals with abortion, it will tell the states, you're free now to do what you want to do, and at that point, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the state legislators will be enormously important in that debate, and so everyone should pay attention to that.
And so how is that decision by the Supreme Court Justice to retire changing the nature of our local campaigns here?
Well, it will. Go ahead, Kat.
No, you can go ahead, Mike.
All right. Go ahead. Okay, don't ever do that to an Irishman. This will raise the profile of the pro-choice, pro-life debate in the Missouri Senate race. And Josh Hawley made some indications in this past week or so that he really wants it to be now one of the focuses of his campaign, the Supreme Court vacancy. Interestingly enough, if the Republicans have their way in the Senate, that vacancy will be filled before Election Day. He went out, Hawley did, last week and said, Claire McCaskill, I want to debate you on the vacancy about the Supreme Court and Supreme Court issues. Ironically, Hawley has not agreed to any debates with his primary opponents in front of the August primary.
Well, he's too busy serving as Attorney General.
Well, you know, I mean, he does have a day job, okay? And so look for this. This has been said all week long, and you probably heard it earlier tonight here on Channel 19. Republicans are galvanized over judicial issues and have been for at least this entire generation. Whether or not Democrats get energized by it because they feel that Roe versus Wade is at risk remains to be seen. I think what's important for people to remember is I don't think that Roe versus Wade is going to be overturned in one fell swoop, but they will try to attack it incrementally. And in fact, the other thing to remember is in places like the state of Kansas and Missouri, in other words, the abortion restrictions have been put in place over the course of Roe versus Wade. That law has been narrowed.
You should have interrupted him earlier.
I told you.
Cut him off. Cut him off. Okay, so one thing that I think we need to keep an eye on, too, is the Kansas gubernatorial race, because Chris Kobach, who spoke yesterday, and obviously Governor Collier did as well, but Chris Kobach did tell the Star that he supports the very controversial heartbeat legislation and said that he would like to see that. He supports something like that being enacted, which is requiring after you can hear the heartbeat, not allowing the abortion.
He was treated like a rock star during the last presidential election, but how much clout does Bernie Sanders have now? This week, the Vermont senator endorses Brent Welder, who's trying to unseat Kansas Congressman Kevin Yoder in a crowded Democratic primary. Sanders makes very few endorsements and rarely makes any in contested primaries. Does his support help or hurt Brent Welder as he runs against teacher Tom Nerman, technology and nonprofit executive Michael McCammon, banking director Sylvia Williams, attorney Sharice David, and Jay Seide, who ran against Yoder 2 years ago? What about a Bernie Sanders endorsement, Eric?
He has a base still. He has that millennial base, and people still believe in him, and people will still follow him. So I think it's a good move. I don't know whether to help that candidate get the voter turnout, but I would have his support if I wanted to run for office.
I will say this. I don't think that in Yoder's district this is a great endorsement for him. I don't think it'll make that much of a difference for Weldman to get this endorsement, because this is very far left. You need something a little bit more moderate if you're going to challenge Yoder.
What's really interesting about this to me is the fact that the Sanders endorsement was not the only one that was made on Welder's behalf this week. This young woman from the Bronx and Brooklyn that pulled off the upset in the New York State primaries, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, endorsed Brett Welder as well, talked about him on an interview with MSNBC this week, and said that Welder and she and some other liberal Democrats, very progressive Democrats, are part of a slate of what is called Justice Democrats, and they are all for the Bernie Sanders-like agenda in terms of public policy. So on the left, and the Democratic primary is going to be a base primary, even in the Kansas 3rd. You know, having a Bernie Sanders endorsement, having the hot Democratic ticket, the flavor of the week at the very least, endorsing you, doesn't hurt.
And can I add to that too? What they'll do is they'll go out after those voters that haven't voted that nobody talks to. That'll be the difference. And you stole my other comment too about the lady.
I'll give it back to you right now.
Okay.
All righty, another push underway to restrict judges in Kansas. This after the state Supreme Court rules this week that the legislature is still not providing enough money for schools, despite adding more than $500 million in new funding during the last session. The bench of 7 justices argued they need to add more cash to compensate for inflation. But the request for more dollars is prompting legislative leaders to revive talk of a constitutional amendment blocking the courts from interfering with school spending. How would that work, Dave Helling?
Well, you'd need 2/3 of both houses of the state legislature to approve the constitutional amendment, to put it on the ballot, and then a simple majority of voters. No one thinks that's going to happen before November, so any change would have to come after the court has ordered the legislature to come up with this additional money. But I think it's just a lot of wasted energy, Nick, frankly, because first of all, you're not going to get 2/3 of a vote, at least with this legislature. More importantly, though, the state is very close to where it needs to be on its schools. The court, in essence, said, hey, adjust these figures for inflation and you'll be fine. That could be another $50, $100 million a year. There's money to do that, or close to money to do that. They're talking about gambling, taxing gambling on sports events in Kansas, maybe the internet sales tax. I think reasonable people in the middle think they can get the court's endorsement, and that will short-circuit this idea of changing the Constitution.
Dave, for the first time, is right.
Oh, okay.
I do the best I can.
All right.
Anyway, very, very quickly, this is not a new idea in Kansas. This was discussed 2 sessions ago. It came up in the tail end of this last session, and it didn't go anywhere. And Dave's right. This is really tough to amend the state constitution, and it's going to be a long shot, and it won't happen until at least 2020.
A week after 3 Kansas City residents are shot dead by police in the same afternoon, the Kansas City Police Department announces they put out a bid to equip officers with body cameras. There's no timetable offered to purchase the cameras, and there's no money for them. So is this just an effort to show community members that the police department is doing something, Eric?
Probably. I think Cleaver had set aside some federal money, and they were going to go after that money, but it's definitely something that raises eyebrows. You had 2 people at Barney Alice Plaza. One had the gun, the other one didn't. They both wind up dead. Why is the victim dead? And so I think the body camera accelerated that conversation to get them to do something about it.
2 points on this. One, I think that one thing that gets lost in this discussion is it's not just the cost of buying the cameras, it's the storage of the video. That is a major financial component and can be logistically difficult for departments to figure out. The second thing I want to bring up is even if they do have cameras, I think that one thing that will be important to watch in the future is how often the camera footage is released, because in other states that has been an issue.
I'd just say quickly that Kat is right. Storage is an expense, but it's also an excuse, because police departments all over the country are adding body cameras. Somehow they've figured out the riddle of being able to pay for enough storage and for the instruments themselves. Kansas City is resisting this. The police department is resisting it. The line officers don't want to do it. And that's why it suddenly costs so much money to suggest that the Kansas City Police Department can't find efficiencies to pay for this important tool. It's probably off the market.
$250 million budget.
Yes, somewhere off the mark.
Imagine getting hired for a new job, and when the boss tells the rest of the staff you're coming, they turn around and start booing. Some even start saying no and crap out loud. How would that make you feel? Well, that's what happened this week as the Kansas City Kansas School Board announces its pick for a new superintendent.
To hire Dr. Charles Faust as superintendent of schools and approve the contract.
The board's pick to replace Superintendent Cynthia Lane is Dr. Charles Faust, chief of performance in the 6th largest school district in North Carolina. Before that, he supervised principals in the largest public school district in Texas. So why the angst and indignation over his hire, Michael Mahoney?
Hometown hires. The folks in KCK, number one, believe that Cynthia Lane did a great job, and they were part of this lawsuit that we just discussed with the education. They believe that Cynthia Lane did a good job. They're going to miss her. They wanted somebody that was familiar with their district. The deputy assistant superintendent was the other candidate. They wanted him. I mean, the hometown.
But it seems extreme, though, to see that kind of reaction at a board meeting, right, Eric?
Yeah, it is. And I feel sorry for him, and I hope he makes it. But when you're coming in and you got that kind of response from the community, that doesn't make for a good tenure.
Just quickly, the Kansas City Kansas School Board is undergoing some political vibrations. Things are, it used to be a fairly smooth operation. There are disagreements on the board. Urban education is always difficult. Change is difficult. Cynthia Lane has been there for a long, long time. To bring someone from out of town will obviously upset some constituencies in the Kansas City, Kansas district, and this may become an issue in further elections for that board.
For a long time, the racial dividing line in Kansas City has been viewed as Troost Avenue. This week, one of the region's largest low-income daycare centers is bridging the divide. Literally, Operation Breakthrough expanding its 31st and Troost facility with a building on the other side of the road, which they've connected with an actual bridge. What's the significance of this move for Troost Avenue?
It gives it more visibility. It expands the daycare opportunities because now they'll have both sides, meaning they'll have larger classroom space. They'll have other programs that they can put in there for parenting and some other things. But it looks nice. I saw the bridge the other day when I was driving out Troost, so it looks really nice.
I wrote a column about Troost. I mean, for years, you're right, Nick, decades it was seen as the dividing line. Drive down Troost now. I mean, it's the changes there are pretty dramatic if you go from downtown south. And the edge of the border between the east side and the rest of the community is shifting more toward Prospect.
It's been nothing but bad news of late for the 18th and Vine Entertainment District. As the Jazz Museum tries to rescue itself from debt, the district's newest amenity falls victim to vandals. Intruders purposely cut a water line, causing hundreds of thousands of dollars in flood damage at the Buck O'Neill Research and Education Center. What happens in that building, and what's the impact of this expensive act of vandalism?
Well, right now they're using the ballroom. There was going to be some office space available. I think they were in the process of transferring it from the museum over to the city so that they could use the GO bond money to finish it. It is considerable damage. It was somebody that had a vengeance against somebody. They knew exactly where to go. They turned the water off, cut the pipe, then went and turned the water back on. So it was somebody that knew exactly what they were doing.
Kent.
I think it's very sad because just a month ago we had the suspected arson, that's how it's being investigated, at the Satchel Paige House, another icon and of Monarchs baseball, and that house, they're still trying to find funding to maybe restore it, but it's kind of a TikTok situation before the demolition date.
I did notice this week, on a positive note when it came to 18th and Vine, though, that the KCATA, which runs the bus service, now looking for bids to connect the Crossroads to the 18th and Vine Jazz District. But why would it be the bus service doing that,
Well,
Dave?
because for reasons that aren't completely clear, they own that land, and they do want to be involved in development on that part of the east side. The problem, Nick, is the Bruce Watkins Freeway, which goes over 18th Street, roughly where that discussion is, and that is a bit of a problem in terms of linking 18th and Vine with 18th and Grand, where your Kansas City Star prints on a daily basis.
And a lot of people in the community feel like the Jazz District is black. That's our heritage, our legacy. Why connect it with Crossroads, even though the city council person said it was a good idea? There'll probably be a lot of pushback about it.
And that is our Week in Review. Our thanks to our news reviewers from KMBC 9 News, Michael Mahoney, and from your Kansas City Star, Dave Helling, 41 Action News reporter Kat Reed, and on call at the call, Eric Wesson. I'm Nick Haynes from all of us at KCPT. Thanks for spending part of your weekend with us.